recording.
There it is.
It's preparing to live stream. And I believe we are on.
I got indication that we're live streaming.
Great.
Yeah, but look at, I'm moving the arms and it doesn't show me. Oh, there's a light, okay.
Yeah, I was shuffling my papers like a minute ago.
Okay, if everybody's ready, I guess we'll get started tonight. All right, so I'll call this meeting of the Lake Stevens Planning Commission to order, and I believe we're all here. Well, sort of. You're there.
Yeah.
All right, with that, we'll get the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. I apologize for apparently misunderstanding the agenda. So, is there any guest business? Is there anybody online that would like to speak to the commission? That
Chair Welch, can we have a call to order and roll call?
well, did they call the order? Is that right here? We're all present. All members are present and accounted for. Is there any guest business? I don't see anybody online. Does anybody know anybody's online?
I don't believe so.
This might be strange, but can I make a request that my fellow commissioner have a, his name needs to be spelled correctly with an O. May we revise this?
Sure.
I'm not a guest, but I want him to keep coming back.
All right, so I don't see, we don't have any guests, do we?
No.
All right, so we'll move on to action items and the approval of the minutes. Hopefully all the commissioners have had a chance to look at the minutes. I know there's a few changes that need to be made since I was not at the meeting, but apparently I show as calling the meeting to order and I'll show as being present at the meeting on the minutes. So I'd ask for those to be changed at least. And if anybody got any other changes?
I do, Chair Welch.
Yeah.
I am not listed as having attended, although I was there. And then I also show up later commenting in the minutes, but if we could add my name to the attendance, that would be great.
All right. Any other changes?
Commissioner Huxford seconded the approval of minutes.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes as amended. All in favor, say aye.
Chair Welch?
Yep.
Chair, that is a change to the minutes of this month, or this meeting, that our last meeting, Commissioner Huxford seconded.
Oh,
Didn't have the word
So-
second.
Yeah, or Commissioner.
Yeah.
And seconded.
okay. My mistake. All right. Any other changes? Can I get a motion to approve the minutes as a approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
I'll second.
I got a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we have the minutes approved. Move on to our next item, which is a discussion item on the 2022 comprehensive plan docket, land use map amendments. Planning Manager Levitan, you have the floor.
All right, thank you, Chair Welch, David Levitan, Planning Manager. So we are here tonight as part of our ongoing discussion of the 2022 comprehensive plan docket. The focus of this evening will be on the two proposed map amendments, which were ratified as part of this year's dockets.
I've lost audio.
I can't hear them either.
We've lost audio.
Okay. Did you hear any of that or was that all muted?
That was all muted.
All right, I'll do the very brief summary. So we're here tonight for the 2022 docket, comprehensive plan, our ongoing discussion. Tonight's meeting is going to be focused on 2 map amendments that were ratified as part of the docket. The first one is a citizen-initiated map amendment. That was for 2 parcels on the south side of 20th Street Southeast. That's map amendment M1. So the south side of 20th Street between South Lake Stevens Road, just east of where South Lake Stevens Road is 20th Street. And then the second one is a city-initiated map amendment, which was basically a general assessment of land use and zoning designations within the eastern half of the 20th Street Southeast corridor sub-area. So that was basically the city council wanting us to do a check-in. It's been 10 years since the sub-area plan has been adopted, wanted to just kind of take a look at it to factor in some of the recent growth targets that were adopted by Snohomish County that project things including an employment deficit and how we might change some of the land use designations and associated zoning as part of the comp plan docket. So I'm going to go through just a series of maps that were included as attachments to the staff report. Kind of as I mentioned, a lot of this is being driven primarily by our projected deficit of employment land over the next 20 years. So we're going to be updating the comp plan to look at to look outwards towards the year 2044. Our next periodic update is going to cover the period of 2024 to 2044. So in advance of that, we want to do kind of an initial check-in on potential amendments within the 20th Street area, which will then lead into a larger discussion of potential citywide amendments to help us meet our growth targets, and then any needed comp plan amendments as far as policies and rules that would help us to meet those growth targets. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So it should show up. So this is proposal, sorry, so let's start with the citizen initiated map amendment. So this was from the new property owners of these 2 parcels, which are a little bit hard to read, but this area hash marked in red. So on the south side of 20th Street Southeast, it currently has a land use designation of high density residential with the corresponding zoning designation of RA12. What the applicant has requested is to change the land use designation to commercial district, which would be the same as this red area on the north side of the street, and the majority of 20th Street as you move to the west, especially on the south side of the street, has that same commercial district designation and an associated zoning designation of commercial as well. So as we kind of consider this amendment, we really, as I mentioned, a lot of the focus is on helping to meet our employment needs, and then also assessing the general residential infill or redevelopment capacity on the site. If you'll see this area to the west here, kind of in the aerial, which is somewhat visible through the transparent zoning, the transparent land use area. This is basically a stormwater facility. It's a wetland that kind of extends on. You'll see these 2 subdivisions to the south that basically have this NGPA that exists here and then kind of extends north into the stormwater facility. So as we look at that, the western portion of this site probably has limited redevelopment capacity just because of the buffers that extend on associated with that wetland complex. So as we evaluate that, we basically need to be thinking about what is kind of essentially the best use of this land use of this property, and does the proposed land use designation, as we move forward with this, really the city needs to make findings as far as whether the proposed docket request meets the decision criteria for a comp plan map amendment. And so this is kind of the first discussion. Obviously, we're going to need to move forward with public hearings. We're going to need to go through the State Environmental Policy Act review process, provide public notice to the Department of Commerce, require public notice to the public as well. And so we just wanted to get the Planning Commission's initial thoughts on this proposed change. I think it was a unanimous recommendation to docket this one as part back in February when the Planning Commission made the recommendation to the City Council. Staff has done an initial analysis as far as the residential capacity. It only shows about 2 units of infill capacity, largely because of the critical areas constraints. We do think that it would probably be better utilized as a commercial site. So I wanted to get the Planning Commission's initial thoughts on that. And then a couple of the questions that we included as part in the staff report, as part of the analysis of proposal M1 was, should the city be reaching out to adjacent property owners to the east to see whether they would be interested in a commercial designation? I think the property that makes the most sense would be this one right here on the west side of 106. 106 leads into the subdivision to the southeast. This is directly contiguous. If you go across 106, there are an additional 2 parcels here that might not make as much sense to have that commercial designation just because they're completely surrounded by residential to the north, the east and the south, and then are kind of separated from this commercial area by 106 southeast. So wanted to get some initial thoughts on that from the Planning Commission. We're going to be needing to have a work session with the City Council as well when they come back from their summer break before we move on to the public hearings. But I wanted to kind of start with this proposal before we move on to the city initiated proposal, which is kind of the assessment of the larger area. So
So the folks that are right next to, right there.
Yeah.
Have you guys talked to them at all?
we haven't. So we wanted to get kind of planning commissioners' thoughts as far as the potential scope of the change in land use designations, whether we should be reaching out. That's something that we would obviously do before we added that to the proposal. We want to get input from property owners. We would have to notify them in the future, but we'd rather reach out to them early so they're not surprised that they're included in a map amendment that they don't know about.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. That they should definitely be reached. I mean, somebody needs to talk to them. So they know.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. On the surface, the move to convert that red hashed area makes a lot of sense to me. But I certainly want to know what the property owners, the adjacent property owners are thinking. They might have other plans to utilize that space. That's not commercial.
Yeah, and would you recommend that we would reach out to kind of these property owners as well? And potentially, this is basically the sub area boundary. It ends at these properties and then east of there is outside of the sub area. Do you think would be worth discussing it with them, or do you think that, kind of 106 would be the natural boundary, or should it really extend to the eastern boundary of the sub area? Obviously, feedback from the property owners.
Doesn't really hurt. It doesn't really hurt to ask them if they're interested in it.
When I was looking at the 2012 plan, it called for high density residential. So in that sub area, so not just commercial, but the possibility of high density residential.
Yeah, and it has that high density residential land use designation now. The corresponding zoning is not multifamily residential, so it's kind of limited to higher density detached single family residential development as well as kind of home development, as opposed to apartments, which would be allowed kind of in the mixed use zone or in the MFR, the multifamily residential zone. And yeah, just I should back up a little bit. Kind of when we look at the development that's occurred within the sub area, as was noted within the staff report, it's been very successful as far as achieving some of the residential targets, some of the residential goals that were identified within the planned action ordinance and the corresponding environmental impact statement. The city shifted the environmental review up to the planning stage in what's called the planned action And so we evaluated the potential impacts of up to 1,000 residential units, and we've already hit almost 900 within the sub area. So we're very much on our way as far as meeting those residential targets. We're kind of on the commercial side, other than Costco, we've been much less successful. And so definitely looking for potential opportunities to expand those commercially designated sites to help us to meet those employment targets and help to bring in retail and office and really help us meet those employment goals. So that's kind of just providing a little bit more context as far as the cities, as far as the private sector has been very successful in meeting kind of the city's residential needs. Hasn't quite provided, what we were hoping for as far as on the commercial side of things. And there are definitely some limitations, especially on the south side, dealing with the water line easement and some other things. And so that's kind of factored in as we move into the city initiated amendment and the consideration of changing some of the other areas off of 99 and on the north side of 20th, closer to 99. That factored in as well as potentially exploring those additional commercial areas.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I agree with Michael where with just not it's a better use for the property as a whole for everyone. I'd also support going to the direct neighbor. The one thing, and I know the city is conscious of this, is just not to get in a situation that like from the past with, all you talk about with C, but just where we have hodgepodge of commercial in any areas, and in these lots, even if you did cross 106, I do think, there's a good likelihood that it would get eventually developed. But that's my only apprehension. I think it makes total logical sense to talk to the neighbor, just about the development, as the other commissioner said, but then also give them the option as well of, hey, are you interested in this? But I would be weary about going across 106. If they were hell bent on never doing it, then it might lead to a situation where, and I have to look at the land, but to have just, I think it looked weird in the city of Lake Stevens to have little areas with commercial buildings and residential in the mix. So I think it's really important, that it wouldn't be assembled.
Yeah, just the sub area boundary is obviously just an artificial boundary. I mean, it goes right into a continuing residential development along the south side of 20th as you get into it, and it's kind of cut off there. But obviously, just kind of, should we be using 106? Should we potentially be exploring using the sub area boundary? Because if you did extend east of 106, then it would go from commercial straight to what's zone medium density residential and it's zoned R6, and that's obviously a lower density than even RA12. And so just kind of what's the best way to transition from that potential commercial use, assuming that we do move forward to public hearing with the recommendation for proposal line 1, what's the best place to have that kind of edge of the commercial area.
Another thing for the commission to keep in mind, and Commissioner Connor Davis alluded to that, is looking back at the old sub-area intent. I know some of you were here, Janice, Linda, and then Todd, obviously, as a council member. It was designed to have modal development and linear development, so really focusing the sub-area, that commercial designation along 20th, along intersections. And if you look at the next map in the packet, it really shows some of these nodal areas that also would include this site. So the idea was, can you get 4-corner commercial construction? So it's really not inconsistent with that. It's just moving over from where the detention facility is currently. And if you pick any site sort of outside of those commercial boundaries, this one's really interesting for consideration because it does have a lot of these natural features that are already dividing it from these other residential areas, creating that buffer. Obviously 106, the Everett power line, or excuse me, the Everett water line to the south, the detention pond. So it really does have a nice break that if you kept it at 106, that it wouldn't impact. If you did jump across that road, though, it's still, again, not inconsistent with the vision for that sub area, which is to have that linear intense development along the road and then step down as you go to the internal properties.
I have 2 thoughts when I review this. One is that you're butting up to wetlands, and there are some sensitive areas that have not protected in the past, but have been bolstered in the past that this would negate. that's of concern to those of us that live here. The other is that it is citizen initiated. And I would be, go on the error on the side of caution when it comes to citizen initiated at this point in time, simply to make sure that the residents that have already invested here know that this is happening, have full light of day, and that there's nothing that is being done without them being fully made aware.
Okay. So a lot of great discussion so far on this. When it comes to the crossing of 106, how much does that water line limit that property possibly becoming more high residential? How much is that going to impact that?
None of the area in the water line could be developed for any residential purpose, so that's 100-foot wide swath. I don't know what the width of that property is. And don't take this as gospel, but we continue to have conversations with the Everett Public Works, and for commercial development, they've come around to the idea that they may allow some parking on the outer buffer of their water line that wouldn't be extended for residential use. So for residential, it would not be available.
Okay. Okay. So is it the, sounds like with the discussion, it's the recommendation so far for the commission to move forward with M1, but making contact with the east property that's east, the very adjacent neighbor, the one right on the east side of that property. Is that correct?
Sure, I'd go full. I'd go as far as we can go.
I'm sorry?
I would venture that we go as far as we go to the line that Mr. Levitan was showing us earlier. I would not stop. I would go all the way over to the line.
Also, you go all the way to the end of the sub-area boundary?
Yep.
That sounds good. I agree with that one.
I do have concern about if commercial was just to extend just straight up until it hits that medium residential area though. I mean, that's not really kind of grading it down or stepping it down. That's a pretty harsh delineation between those two.
Chair Welch, this is Jennifer Davis, can I comment? I'm thinking there's two questions when it comes to there's notification of the adjacent properties, and then there's considerate that this is even, that M1 is even happening or being considered. And then there's the idea of including the adjacent properties in that change. So I suspect, and Commissioner Huxford, you can correct me, but I suspect what you were indicating is that you think that notification should happen all the way to the 20th, the sub-area boundary, not necessarily that the change should happen across 106th. Is that correct? This one must be really clear.
Yes.
Okay, I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, just to clarify, I mean, they would be within, well, maybe the Far East property would be within the distance, but they would receive notification. It's just, this is more a question of consultation for a potential map for inclusion in the potential city initiated map amendment M3, where we're looking at basically the entire eastern half of the sub area. Should we be considering those areas for that commercial district designation? And we would consult with the property owners before we move forward on public hearing. We would want to know kind of what they think. We would factor that in, obviously, to any decisions and recommendations moving forward into the public hearing stage of the document. So
What is the distance from the change where they would receive a mail, an actual mailer, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I'd have to measure it though. The one just east of 106 looks like it definitely would. The one further, but I mean, we can always notify more. I mean, this seems like it would be appropriate to if they're in an area that's going to be changing, you know, if it's only a couple properties to the west, we could notify them as well if it's above and beyond requirements of the municipal code. I mean,
Okay.
just give them a courtesy notice, basically.
So is it the recommendation of the, well, I mean, we're not doing a formal, this is just a discussion for staff. So we recommended to staff to move forward with M1, keep it going, and possibly the just east property, if they want to possibly go to commercial also.
Yes, I agree with that.
So with that, I guess we can move on to the next part of the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, if commissioners are comfortable, we can move on.
Yeah.
To the point. So the next one, kind of, we broke this out into kind of 3 distinct areas that we identified. As I mentioned, we were looking at basically the whole eastern half, so everything east of SR9. And so this is what we're calling proposal M3 area A. So it's this area in red. The shade of red right here. So this all has existing commercial designation. This all has existing high density residential with the corresponding zoning designation of RA12. Immediately to the east are the new farmhouses as well as the Park on 20th apartment. So there's a mix of townhouses and multifamily residences to the east. There are a number of subdivisions further to the north and then further to the west that have been developed under that RA12 zoning. So kind of more compact single family residences as far as the lot sizes. And so kind of this is an area where we have not seen residential redevelopment. There was originally an exploration of a potential docket request. It was rescinded, where they were looking at the potential to increase the residential capacity in this area. And it was discussed a little bit with the city council, but I think based on some of our employment needs and really, some of our potential needs for additional commercially designated land, that was not, it was rescinded before it got onto the council consideration and ratification of the docket. So this is an area that we think would potentially be appropriate, that we'd like to do further analysis as far as a potential commercial or mixed use designation. If it had a commercial designation, it would be more limited as far as the residential redevelopment capacity. If it had that mixed use designation, there would be a little bit more flexibility to allow for residential development. It would depend on what the implementing zoning district was, if it was mixed use neighborhood, if it was straight mixed use, as far as what those mix of uses could look like and whether they could be kind of standalone residential. So wanted to get kind of the commission's initial thoughts on this area, as far as the commercial capacity versus mixed use, and kind of what commissioners think and how we should move forward with this analysis.
Again, to Commissioner Cronin's point a moment ago, is it cohesive? Does it make sense to do this? So that we're staying with the sub-area plan that was so diligently worked on a couple of years ago. Does this make sense? Is this changing it substantially, and does this set a precedent to other areas in the city that's going to follow same?
Yeah, I can pull up the graphic that Russ was referencing earlier. These are just the map amendments, but I can pull up the full packet to show that there was a planned kind of commercial, essentially center here at the intersection. So basically the 4 corners, and as Russ mentioned, there would potentially be some flexibility, as far as extending basically the parameters of that commercial kind of center designation there at the corner of 99th, and kind of fill in that area between the farmhouses and 99th. And so it's something, again, we would need to reach out to, we would need and want to reach out to the property owners before we move forward, but wanted to get those initial thoughts. And I appreciate that initial feedback as far as kind of the spirit and intent of the sub area plan. That was, the city did put a lot of time and effort in back in 2012. So
Also with the, go back to one of your earlier comments that we are at the 10-year point, and by the ordinance we adopted, so we should do a check-in after 10 years to see how it's working, and you sort of heard how we've done on the population side. We're really close to our targets, and the commercial has not been fully achieved, and with some modifications along the way from the council. So this is just another opportunity to really look at that commercial number that had been proposed.
One question that I've got is when I look at high density residential, the M1, let's say a good example, it's all single family detached homes. That looks like medium density, but those are homes that were built over the last few years. If we're designating, or if the commission is suggesting, and then council approves, and something is high density, why high density housing is it there? What's been constructed over the last, I think 2020. I'm looking at some of these houses that were built. It's not high density housing though.
And a lot of that's an artifact from the way our zoning code looked 10 years ago when this adopted to this community. High density residential was compact subdivisions. And so that definition has moved. As over the last year, or 2 years now, we went through the missing middle exercise to establish some other areas and looking at mixed use. So that definition has definitely evolved from what you're seeing here.
Yeah.
There was always an idea that there could be attached housing, or whether it's a townhome or apartment, but really looking to that into what's called multifamily zone or the mixed use zone. What the thought was when we created the mixed use zones, we created 2 zones. One was more commercially oriented, the other was more residentially oriented. And that's what you see where the apartments and the townhomes have been built. So at that point, it's a matter of definition, where I think our code again has sort of evolved.
Yeah, sure.
To, I think that you would recognize coming from the East Coast
Yeah,
to
yes.
what is high density,
Sure.
or if we look at our neighbors to the south or something.
Right on.
yeah, and we'll get into it a little bit more with Area B, which is the area just north of this. As far as there's a big difference between the multifamily residential zone and the RA12 zone, but they're both implementing zoning districts of the high density residential land use designation. And so, for example, if you were to go to, an area that was currently RA12 and had that high density land use designation, you wouldn't need a comp plan map amendment to go multifamily. It would be just a reason because it already has the appropriate land use designation. We could potentially explore that, and we're going to discuss that in the next one in Area B. But as Russ mentioned, and as was kind of described in the staff report, we don't really have. We would like to see kind of the preliminary results of our housing needs analysis to see. We know that we've been pretty successful as far as achieving residential development within the sub area. But we'd like to see kind of, do we have still an unmet need for multifamily residential for specific housing types, housing sizes, that would be more appropriate for a different zoning district. So that's kind of a related and sort of separate kind of parallel discussion, but something that we definitely should be considering and are kind of is discussed within the Area B. But for this area with direct frontage along 20th, that is directly kind of that's across the street, and then immediately east of an area that already has that commercial designation, and then there's the mixed use area to the east. Wanted to kind of get initial thoughts. And again, would be reaching out to property owners and see what they think before we make a kind of a recommendation as far as moving forward. But appreciate all the thoughts and the thoughtful discussion for commissioners.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I would definitely support moving into the analysis of commercial redevelopment potential. It obviously fits the city's vision on 20th there. I did look at all the owners too, and I do think it's something that likely could be assembled. So I see no no reason not to, see what that housing needs analysis comes back as and, have this ready and loaded from the standpoint of information, when you have to make all those decisions. So I support, at the very least, taking it to the next phase and seeing what its development potential is and kind of crunching those numbers.
Yeah, we gave some very basic numbers, and obviously the number of job potential is gonna vary widely depending on the type of businesses, whether the land can be consolidated under a single development versus kind of really chopped up into, you can't do as much when you're doing it on these little half-acre or quarter-acre parcels. And so, there's definitely a difference. And so it's hard to really give, we try to give just the analysis that was provided within the physical lands report by Snohomish County, but that isn't necessarily indicative of.
Totally, I wasn't by any means taking a shot at that.
Yeah.
I appreciated that information. I was just saying more as we're talking about all these things.
Yeah.
To continue, I support this enough to put my, to put behind whatever the next phase is, as far as taking it to see what the numbers could be, what it could be, and all that, just from the next step.
Yeah, this area seems to be less impacted by critical areas when compared, especially as you move further north and you see that kind of large wetland complex. You see the NGPA tract that's in the western edge of the farmhouses, and it extends to the west. And so that central portion of area B that we're going to be discussing next seems to be more impacted, and that would, as we'll get into, would suggest maybe, having the type of uses that can be focused right along 99. This is a little bit less impacted. It's outside of it's not impacted by the Everett water line easement, which is a net benefit, and maybe something, if we had known how difficult that was going to be back in 2012, might have, factored into some of the decisions that were made. But this is, I think, is the perfect opportunity to really be assessing, does some additional commercial on the north side of the street or mixed use makes sense. So
yeah, I agree. And some of the owners own lots next to each other. Like I said, I don't think this one would be sitting there or end up like C, where you might have a situation in their hands.
any other thoughts? All right, I'm going to move on to what we're calling Area B then, which is just north of this area, Area B. So what is this area? This is probably the hardest one to read. It doesn't show the wetland complex quite as well. It wasn't shown up very well in orange or red or any of this other stuff because of black, but it's basically this area, kind of north of Area A, just east on the east side of 99th, immediately west of the farmhouses development there, which is townhomes. And so this is an area that, we kind of think we'd like to do some analysis for a couple different alternatives. As I mentioned, if this were to say if the housing needs analysis were to show that we definitely met our need for detached single family residential, but looking at our population that we needed some additional multifamily residential. That's something that could be looked at either as part of a multifamily residential zoning designation or a mixed use zoning designation that allows for primarily residential development. It's an area that could also be considered if the city really wants to be aggressive in trying to tackle its commercial land needs, could potentially look at extending that commercial land use designation and implementing zoning all the way up, further north along 99th. 99th does have a bus line. It's not frequent service, but it's I think every hour, and serves down to Ashway and also into Everett, and then obviously further connections into Seattle and other places. So there is some, transit connections that are available in this area. So wanted to get some initial thoughts as far as potential higher density residential, potential for mixed use. As you can see, the property immediately to the east of farmhouses has that mixed use neighborhood with the mixed use land use designation, and it developed as all residential, so kind of wanted to get the initial thoughts. Would it be appropriate to kind of consider commercial that far north along 99, considering the city's employment needs in the future? So I'd welcome any and all thoughts.
To use your word, I think it's too aggressive at this point.
I would tend to agree. When I was looking at that map, it does, to become commercial, that extends real deep into the residential area and the wetland that's associated with it.
And I would third that. You said it would be just too aggressive at this point. Making that initial move to the north of 20th seemed, is practical, but take a look and see how that transition goes before progressing further north. It should have,
Just for a point of clarification, I'm not hearing support to go commercial. Would there be support for the other alternative to look at that for other type of housing?
Like
Multifamily.
multifamily
Housing.
Yeah, I would be down on multifamily, absolutely.
Those are big lots and that's a big green space. And my thought would be, you've got legacy homeowners there most likely that are, in the middle of a green belt buffer, essentially entering into that city. I would hesitate to monkey with that, at least at this point.
I have a question. How big of an allocation of resources is it, like, to include this or to not include it? Would that, like, where would it suffer from the city standpoint? Is that done internally or is that?
It's gonna be an internal review.
Yeah, because I don't see, even for any of this, even if, if I didn't even support, the multifamily or the commercial or anything, I don't see, aside from unless it's gonna lead to, coming to fruition when the city doesn't want it to type thing. I'd be in support of assessing it, reviewing it, seeing its highest and best use and all that stuff. I think all those numbers would be interesting and valuable, especially as we're, making those decisions, so.
But don't you think that there, again, we have people that are buying property or renting space, knowing that the city will agree with them to revise and renew that property or that space. If this conversation is had, somebody is going to make the move to move these people out.
And if that's true, like, I don't understand the politics of it. If that gets the ball rolling too hard or something.
You know politics of
I'd just like to say that.
it.
Close my eyes.
Yeah. Well, and since we're all in a sauna and losing 20 pounds, we don't need to go back in time, but I can tell you that we've had public comment before, probably before your time actually, where we've had people that have come in and said, I've rented this, I want to have this business, and the city is going to agree with me, right? And I'm just not wanting to get into a situation where we make it available for someone to come in and do something like that in this
Get their
space.
hopes up on something. We're down. I know, I understand that. But like I said, also on the devil's advocate side of it too, I appreciate the cities that are just trying to get the numbers from the residential, the commercial, the jobs and all that too. So I know it's a delicate balance. This, agreeing with the other commissioners, this does seem aggressive and it definitely would change the landscape of the city. So
As far as the potential
for potential for commercial or even high density residential, but at the same time, that's kind of where everything's going anyway, so it's definitely a change. So I think that's, that probably leads to some of our reluctance and apprehension about it.
Yeah, I think the thought on the multifamily residential one, we do want to get some of the analysis from the preliminary housing needs analysis, which we should have within about the next month, to just kind of see kind of housing types, housing sizes, what the city is really projected to need. For multifamily residential or mixed use, just because we obviously don't have a site specific critical area study, but just by looking at it, you can tell that there's definitely some encumbrances on a big chunk of the eastern portion. And so there might be more development potential that would be able to protect those natural resources better if you had a little bit more higher density that could be focused on the western portion. That was why we kind of threw out there the potential for thinking about commercial, just to get the commission's initial thoughts as kind of the land use liaisons to the council, kind of what they thought and reflecting, living in the community. obviously. But yeah, no, I appreciate the thoughts so far. So great discussion.
I think part of the thought process also might need to go to what is 99th going to be for us? Because there's been so much development of houses already on 99th going all the way from Chapel Hill heading south. Is 99th just going to start becoming either housing centric or a little bit of mixed use in there? Is that going to become like a major roadway now?
It was designated one of our collectors at the time of the sub-area between 20th Street and the Lake Stevens Center. So it already is that. You know, we have capital plans for future improvements of that roadway. So yeah, it already is a major north thoroughfare.
How would these designations work with those capital plans? Because if we already have plans for what's going to happen with 99th, how would this zoning either hurt or help or make those plans change?
I don't know that it would change the designation. Obviously, we're a little landlocked there. We'd have to make sure that the trip generation was still compatible with the road design as a collector and the widths and the elements of that.
Yeah, and one of the alternatives and kind of that I brought up just very briefly is, some of these things could be discussed as part of the periodic update where we are going to be doing an update to our transportation element and doing some kind of more detailed transportation analysis that we have some funding for. We're going to have money from the state to do some additional analysis. So we don't necessarily need to include it as part of the 2022 document if it's something where there are associated capital improvement concerns or traffic concerns, transportation concerns that we really need to get into a more detailed discussion before we should even be considering changes. That's something that could be pushed into the 2024 update where obviously
Which would be next year, 2023.
Yeah, we're going to be starting it next year. And so, yeah, it's if we don't do it now, it doesn't mean that we can at least consider some potential changes and take a more holistic approach.
I wonder if that might make more sense, considering we're waiting on a report here that's going to really detail what the needs of the city truly are. Right now, I feel like we're almost kind of speculating on what those needs might be. But if we have a report in front of us that says, really what's missing is, a particular type of zoning or a particular type of housing, then maybe we can go back and look and say, okay, well, of all these options, it might be that the best option to meet that goal is one of these, or maybe it's not one of these at all, it's something else.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I think that's, a slightly different discussion, and it's, I think, a little bit more cut and dry as far as our commercial needs as opposed to our residential needs. Our commercial needs and just the trends that have happened over the 10 years, the last 10 years within the sub-area, we're not anywhere close to, what we were hoping to get and what we planned for within the planned action ordinance. And so that's, identifying potential areas for commercial is a little bit different than really what those residential needs are. So yeah, I appreciate that feedback.
But isn't part of the, I know we've been delayed on, I know there's not been a lot of commercial interest, but with the Costco going in, we were hoping that once we got an anchor store like that, we might see more interest. Might it be best to see how things develop as that opens up and gets moving?
Yeah, and it's, again, it's a few months out if we want to put a pause on at least this northern area. Aside from Costco, we've obviously seen the development of the Trestle Station, which has been really successful. We have 2 small commercial startups also on 20th now. So yeah, there is some increased interest in it along the way, keep expanding.
I mean, I would personally like to see this pause or at least push till maybe next year's comp plan and see where we're moving along, see how things are moving in that area. Is there any other input on this? So.
All right, great, thank you. So I'm just going to touch briefly on this next one, just so we Then I'll lose another 5 pounds before the end of the meeting, but this is an area, so this is 97th right southeast, so just east of SR9, access from South Lake Stevens Road, where it cuts in from SR9. If you'll remember, as part of one of the docket proposals was from a property owner. Here, there's one undeveloped parcel on 97th Drive Southeast. It's an established residential neighborhood that was built in the late 1960s and early 1970s. It had an original land use designation of high density residential. The city council, as part of the 2019 docket, the staff did some additional analysis, and as part of that 2019 docket, the city council approved a change in this area from high density residential to commercial. We did have that citizen initiated proposal that was not docketed, primarily because it would have been kind of a site specific comp plan map amendment, which isn't something that we typically do. They hadn't really reached out to their neighbors, but we noted in recommending that it not be docketed that we could look at this area as part of the larger M3 map amendment, which is the city initiated amendment. So just wanted to get just kind of the planning commission's thoughts, just because we had noted that we would look at this area. I think given how rapidly residential property values and housing costs have escalated, especially in the 10 years, which was kind of the bottom of the market when, back in 2012, and probably 3, if not 4 times more than they were back in 2012. There's, commercial redevelopment, I think, has definitely been slowed by that. We've had a little bit of interest as far as commercial redevelopment potential for this property here, kind of along South Lake Stevens Road. But even that, given the size of these parcels, probably would need to see some accumulation and some consolidation of properties to really facilitate kind of larger scale commercial redevelopment. So in general, just because of our projected deficit of commercial land and the fact that this was only just changed to commercial back in 2019, staff generally isn't recommending to kind of re-examine or to go back to that residential land use designation, unless we were to maybe be a little bit more aggressive in identifying areas that, well, this isn't appropriate for commercial, but here's some other areas within the sub area where we might be able to transfer some of this commercially designated land. And so just wanted to get some thoughts from the planning commission. And yeah, appreciate any ideas.
We can open up to the floor.
I mean, yeah, personally, I would support removing the commercial designation. I know that's not as feasible. Do you think if hypothetically, like if area A and the new bar or the new, the new brewery, like would that be included in like a trade-off? I mean, you said that with the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any hard and fast numbers as far as what we need to be doing. I mean, we're kind of looking at this cumulatively as far as our, I think any area that we potentially change from commercial to residential, especially as we get into the 2024 update, and we have to be either doing map amendments or developing additional reasonable measures to help us to meet our countywide planning policies, which include the growth targets. Then, that any step backward will probably we need to have an additional step forward as far as helping to meet those, projected employment needs. And so, it is relatively limited as far as the estimated employment capacity in there. I think about 30 jobs for the entire cul-de-sac, so less than 2 per property. There could be questions as whether it makes sense, as long as all of these are accessed from the same area from South Lake Stevens, then it seems kind of like a cohesive neighborhood that should probably either be all residential or all commercial. I thought about, is there an opportunity to have the northern portion that would potentially, if you're redeveloping this area off of, that has access from 20th, could they be consolidated with this? Do the ones along South Lake Stevens Road make sense? Potentially have some like neighborhood commercial right there on the corner because of, the role of South Lake Stevens Road. but it gets to be a little bit harder when you're kind of within kind of one cohesive
Totally.
residential cul-de-sac, just thinking about how to potentially divvy those up. So just wanted to kind of get, thoughts and ideas.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about the ones on Lake Stevens down there, but even I was thinking if, like with the ones on the northernmost ones, if you pinched off those 4 lots, then I wonder what the fire code would be, like the fire truck turnarounds, I wonder what, if it even be feasible for
Yeah,
anybody to do it on a bigger level. So yeah, so like I said, I think ideally, I'd like that I just don't see it going anywhere, and I know that's not really an option, but I guess I wish it was just residential. But if it was something where, because I guess how are you blocking the person from putting a commercial building in or not blocking, but the
So
person
the-
that's-
They don't want residents.
They want to build residents.
So
they want to build residential.
They want to build residential, and because they have this zoning designation and because they're vacant, so all of the other homes are what are called legal non-conforming. They were built under residential zoning. We have a whole non-conforming code as far as the extent of improvements that can happen on those. What happens if, say, it's damaged by fire or destroyed by fire. We have a whole code section on non-conforming. They're not considered non-conforming because there's not an existing residence there. They have commercial zoning. You're not likely to get like a 7-Eleven go in between 2 houses.
Yeah.
So,
No, I was thinking about that differently. Yeah,
No, it's the opposite.
that's interesting. Conundrum.
And if I can just jump in, this is the worst vote I ever took as a commissioner. And Gary Peter Shagan voted to make this right, and I voted against him. I regretted it. And this is, we've landlocked these people. We've put them in an untenable situation. And the only right thing to do is to take it back to where it was. We did this land swap for some land on 97 or 92 to do some residential out there, and we switched the commercial from 92 to here. You remember this? This was a bad choice. I made a bad choice. My recommendation would be that we make this right and that we do what's right by this neighborhood.
I would agree.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it was, I was part of this choice at the council level, and I didn't realize, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but obviously that area is not going to work the way it is. So it should probably go back. No one's going to bundle up all these properties in one. Every single one of them's owned by somebody else. So it's not like that's not practical probably. So, and like I said, they only got 1 lot that's left to be developed by a family. And I think it should go back to residential. That way these people can, I just think we should go back on that one. So I agree with Commissioner Huxford.
I also, Commissioner Jennifer Davis, I also agree with that, the Chair Welch's statement.
I do agree.
all right, great. Now we can definitely factor that into kind of our larger analysis of M3. That there was kind of general consensus from the planning commission. And factor that into our larger analysis. Again, I appreciate on that. And so, any other comments on area C or any other kind of components of the map amendment?
I'd say you did a good job presentation. It was easy to read.
Great. So moving forward, we'll definitely be doing some additional analysis. We'll take kind of the feedback as far as outreach to some of the property owners within M1, as far as the one, especially immediately east of that property on the west side of 106. Reach out to kind of some of the property owners on the north side of 20th for M3 area 1. Kind of generally take the direction that we've heard tonight and the feedback that we've heard tonight, and then we will be wanting to brief the city council before we get in, kind of move into the public hearings during as we move into fall. Just again, appreciate all the great dialogue and great conversation. That's super helpful. So that's what I have on this one.
All right, thank you very much. So when we move on to item 6 will be Commissioner's report, and now I'll move on to Vice Chair Dewar.
No report this evening.
Commissioner Huxford?
Follow up to the conversation that I had in our last meeting, I did attend the city council meeting where our Airbnb VRBO discussion was completely discounted. Mayor Daley tried to pass a memorandum moratorium that would have at least locked things as they are now to not allow any further until this task force got their recommendation submitted. Councilmember Jorstad wouldn't even consider it. Only 2 of our city council people voted to approve that. Thank you, Councilmember Peter Shagan, for being one of those 2 people. The task force has since done nothing to come to resolution on that, and they will not be discussing it until they return from hiatus after August, and then they have to go to public hearing. We're in September. You do the math. All of our work has been, in my opinion, completely negated. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Jennifer Davis.
Nothing for me tonight, thanks.
Commissioner Connor Davis.
No report this evening.
Commissioner Holt.
I just want to double check. We're going to have a meeting on August 3rd, August 17th, September 7th, and September 21st, correct?
That's the plan at this point, and then we would go back to the monthly.
Okay, I just wanted to double check just to make sure. Otherwise, no report.
And we're going to be here in this hot box until then, correct?
We'll figure out how to keep the AC on.
I'm gonna bring a yoga mat and call this the gym, and we're gonna be doing all
I guess the
this.
AC shuts off at 5.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Commissioner Davis and Welch, you are missing this action this evening.
I'm back to my college week, so.
It's all good. It's all good.
I will not make you feel bad that my air conditioning is working wonderful right now. All right, Commissioner Cronin.
No report.
All right. The chair only thing I will say is I want to thank Vice Chair Doer for taking over for me when I was absent. And I am sorry that I misunderstood. I should wait at the gate to get into the facility there. So I kind of misunderstood how this was working this time around. So I apologize for not being there. Other than that, I have nothing else to report, and we'll move on to the director's report.
Dave's going to introduce the first item, and then I have a few items for you tonight. Before we do that, though, I want to introduce the Planning Commission to Cody Schwint. He is our new permit lead. He's here tonight shadowing Jenny to see how this goes, and he would be a backup to Jenny or to Natalie or other permit specialists at board and commission meetings as duty calls. So welcome.
Thanks, Russ. All right, great. And I'm just going to be super brief in the interest of safety. So yeah, just on the housing action plan, wanted to give a quick update. So we've been working on some outreach materials. We're going to be doing our kickoff as far as some of the public engagement and trying to raise awareness of the project and what the role of it is and what the city's looking to accomplish. So we're going to be having some materials, a couple poster boards at Aquafest next weekend. I'm sure everybody's going to be coming just to talk about the City of Lake Stevens Housing Action Plan. Yeah, we might just be taking up just everyone's time. It's going to be hard to accommodate all of our fans, but yeah, so really what we're trying to get is just kind of why the city's doing it. We want to kind of talk to people and kind of portray what trends have been recently. And really a big focus on, that we've heard from the community is on housing affordability, kind of anecdotally the ability of people's children to, buy a house in Lake Stevens, which is rapidly becoming a somewhat unattainable goal. And so we want to let people know what we're doing, kind of the role of the housing needs analysis, and then how there's going to be an opportunity to get a lot of public engagement through the fall and the winter to give ideas as far as the city's needs and what types of actions and strategies the city should be taking moving forward. So we're going to be doing a variety of different engagement techniques, in-person events like Aquafest. We're planning to have either a September or October kind of housing forum that would be kind of largely led and hosted by the planning commission, which at your last meeting you indicated that you'd like to be very much involved and kind of be that liaison between the project and the community, which we definitely appreciate. So we're working on that and working on the engagement plan. We'll continue to share where we're at on that. As I said, the housing needs analysis, we should have a draft within about the next month. So we can share that hopefully at our second meeting in August, kind of a very early draft of that. And we'll be giving some input to our consultants, refining that before bringing that back to the planning commission and the city council. That's really an important first piece before we can develop kind of actions and strategies. We need to know where we're at and what we need. So yeah, that's a major thing.
A real quick question on the housing action report. So we're going to get initial draft late August. When will we get another update? Probably after that.
So Todd and Jennifer, are you able to hear us now? Or
Yeah, you were frozen for a second there.
Yeah, it's because Jenny's computer died. So
Oh.
you don't want to look at me.
Okay.
So we're done with the housing action plan. I'll let Russ give a very blind presentation on the remaining items on the director's report.
Well, real quick about the housing action plan was, since we're going to be getting an initial late August, but we're still going to be meeting there. I'd like to know when possibly could we have an update at maybe when we're back in the mill, so a little bit more public seeing it that way, because obviously we're not only the public's virtual right now. I think it would be great if they got a chance to possibly, if they want to show up live and see it once we're back in the mill, that we get something at least at one of the meetings at that time for the public.
Yeah, so that was, it might have cut off right as the computer was dying. So we are planning to have kind of a community forum, housing forum, like a community workshop in either September or October. I'm still working out the exact dates and kind of depending on when we have that housing needs analysis ready. We really want to be able to analyze it, digest it, and share it with the community. So I think that would be a great opportunity to share the findings and kind of how that's going to impact the rest of the project moving forward over the next 6 to 9 months.
Okay, that was my only concern, just to make sure we had that. I think you were talking about it, but everything kind of died and I kind of lost you.
All right, great. Yeah, Russ.
Okay, just a few other items for the commission. Wanted to let you know that we have selected a consultant to do our analysis of the industrial area. The consultants are going to have their kickoff meeting tomorrow with staff. So we are going forward on that project and we will bring you regular updates as we receive them. This first effort for them is going to be a lot of technical detail, but we'll definitely keep you in the loop, especially as we get towards the implications for land use and zoning a little later in the process. Tomorrow night, the city's going to be hosting an open house for the Sunset Park renovations. That will be held at the mill at 6:30, brought to you by our very own park board. And we're excited to do that project. It'll be a nice facelift for that project. It's had some, we'll say, deferred maintenance before it came into the city. So we're hoping to get a design together this year. We already have a great concept, so give that to the public and then find some funding and get that thing built in the next year or so. And the city has received some grant funding. We received notice today that we've received funding for our climate action plan. That will be a new element for our comprehensive plan. So we received $80,000 to start work on that. So probably in about a month or so, Dave will get another great task, getting a consultant on board to start doing that work. And then we'll be receiving a $125,000 grant from the Department of Commerce to help us with our comp plan update. As a lot of our legacy members will remember, we've never had consultant help when we've done our comp plans. We've all rolled up our sleeves and built great plans, but so that'll be a little bit different exercise for us this next go around. So glad to get some fresh perspectives as we move that into the next chapter. And then just another reminder, you got an email earlier this week from Jill Meese on my team, and she's putting out the call for action for Aquafest. So if you want to spend some time in the sun and engaging with the folks in the city and tell them what the planning commission is doing, what the city's doing, I'd love to have you volunteer your time for a few hours. So give Jill an email if you're willing. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, since I know you guys are hot and ready to go, is there anything else real quick? All right, nothing. I get a motion to adjourn. Motion a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And that's it. You guys have a good one. We'll see each other in a few weeks.
Thank you. Take care, Tom. You will.